Television turned these stars into surrogate family members welcomed into American living rooms every week as the steady, dependable presence a nation wanted to believe was real. That illusion depended entirely on stability, and nothing threatened it faster than a divorce. So when these marriages quietly fell apart, the stars involved and the networks behind them went to extraordinary lengths to keep the truth from ever reaching the public. These are 15 classic television stars whose divorces were hidden from the press for months, years, sometimes almost entirely because the character America loved was never allowed to have a broken home. Donna Reed. For 8 seasons, Donna Reed embodied the picture-perfect television housewife on The Donna Reed Show, a series built around the comforting image of a stable, happy suburban family. Week after week, audiences watched a devoted husband, well-behaved children, and a warm home that always seemed to have a gentle solution for whatever small trouble the episode brought. Off-screen, though, Reed's own marriage told a very different story. Her husband, producer Tony Owen, also ran the show behind the scenes, and for years their real relationship was quietly falling apart even as their television counterparts modeled the ideal American family. The couple had wed in 1945 and would go on to have 4 children together, but by the mid-1960s, according to Reed herself, the marriage had grown difficult. She later admitted she stayed largely for her children's sake, unwilling to see them raised by a stepfather. Because Owen produced the series, the pair had unusual control over how much of their private life reached entertainment reporters. That access let them keep up a convincing public partnership long after their marriage had stopped working at home. They didn't divorce until 1971, 5 years after the show ended its run in 1966, which meant Reed was spared the added indignity of her real marriage collapsing in headlines while her television family was still airing new episodes each week. Reed later remarried, finding lasting happiness with retired Army Colonel Grover Asmus in 1974, a union that lasted until her death in 1986. It was a quieter final chapter, but a far more contented one than the years that came before. Eve Arden built a beloved television career playing sharp-witted, self-reliant working women, most memorably as the title character in Our Miss Brooks. That image of confident independence made her real-life romantic history a subject of considerable public curiosity, since audiences often wondered whether the actress's personal life matched the poise she projected on screen. Arden's marriage to literary agent Edward Grinnell Ned Bergen, whom she wed in 1939, ended in divorce in 1947. The split drew notably less press attention than the scrutiny other actresses of her stature usually endured. Biographers credit this relative privacy to 2 factors: Arden's own careful handling of her public image and the simple fact that television stardom and the tabloid interest that came with it was still years away for her. At the time of the divorce, she was known mainly for supporting film roles, including her Oscar-nominated turn in Mildred Pierce, rather than as a household name. Arden did not remarry quickly. It wasn't until 1952, 5 years later, that she wed actor Brooks West. That same year marked another turning point, the television premiere of Our Miss Brooks, the role that would define her career and earn her the first ever Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series. Her marriage to West lasted until his death in 1984, and together they raised 4 children. With such a long, stable second marriage anchoring her later public image, the brief, quieter first marriage faded almost entirely from public memory, overshadowed by decades of professional success and domestic stability that followed. Ann Sothern. Ann Sothern's television career cultivated an image of breezy, capable independence, one that made her personal romantic history a source of ongoing fan magazine curiosity through the 1950s. Long before her TV fame, though, Sothern had already weathered a very public divorce. Her marriage to actor and band leader Roger Pryor, which began in 1936, ended in 1943 amid her claims that he had been mentally cruel to her. Barely a week after the divorce was finalized, she married actor Robert Sterling, with whom she had her only child daughter, Patricia. That second marriage lasted until 1949, ending well before Southern reinvented herself as a television star. By the time she launched Private Secretary in 1953 and later The Ann Sothern Show, both of her earlier marriages were long settled, giving columnists little fresh material to speculate about. What set Sothern apart from many peers was the unusual business power she wielded behind the scenes. Through her own production company, Anahar Productions, she helped produce her television series herself, giving her far greater say over her public image and career trajectory than most actresses of her era enjoyed. That blend of on-screen charm and off-screen business savvy became part of her appeal. Audiences saw a confident, self-sufficient woman on their television sets, and in Sothern's case, the image wasn't far from the truth. She had spent 2 decades navigating Hollywood's demands, and by the 1950s, she had learned how to hold on to control few actresses of her generation ever secured for themselves. Andy Griffith. Throughout much of the 1960s, Andy Griffith stood as the very picture of small-town American decency, playing the calm, principled Sheriff Andy Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. So when news broke of his 1972 divorce from Barbara Edwards, his wife of more than 2 decades, it caught many longtime fans off guard. Nothing in his public persona had ever hinted at trouble at home. In truth, the marriage had reportedly been strained for years before the split finally became official. Griffith and Edwards had married back in 1949, well before his television fame, and together they had adopted 2 children, weathering the pressures of his rising career along the way. By the time the divorce was finalized, however, whatever difficulties had built up privately over the decades finally proved too much to overcome. Because the announcement came in 1972, 4 years after the original series had already wrapped its run. In 1968, the story never generated the kind of intense national coverage it likely would have during the height of the show's popularity. Entertainment reporters and fan magazines had largely moved on to other subjects, and Griffith's next major television role, Matlock, was still more than a decade away, meaning there was no active hit series for the tabloids to link the divorce to. Even so, for fans who had spent nearly a decade watching Griffith embody warmth, patience, and stability on their television screens every week, learning of the quiet unraveling behind that image felt like something more personal than ordinary celebrity news, almost as if a small piece of that trusted small-town world had turned out to be less permanent than it seemed. Dinah Shore. Dinah Shore had built her entire television persona around warmth, hospitality, and old-fashioned charm, the trademark sunny optimism that made her one of the most trusted faces in American living rooms through the 1950s. That carefully cultivated image made her 1962 divorce from actor George Montgomery a genuinely delicate matter for those managing her public profile. The couple, married since 1943, had reportedly endured years of quiet strain before the split became public in late 1961 and was finalized the following spring. Long separations brought on by Montgomery's overseas film work and Shore's demanding television schedule had slowly worn away at the marriage, even as the two maintained a warm public front for years. When the divorce finally came after nearly 2 decades together and 2 children, it surprised many fans who had seen the couple as a model Hollywood family. Unlike the image the original story suggested, Shore's career didn't sail through unaffected. Her long-running Chevy show ended around this period, and Chevrolet dropped its sponsorship just months after the divorce was finalized. Shore largely withdrew from weekly television afterward, moving her family from Beverly Hills to Palm Springs and staying mostly out of the spotlight until her return in 1970 with the new variety program Dinah's Place. In later years, Shore rarely dwelled on the marriage's end in interviews, preferring instead to let her decades of broadcasting success and her eventual comeback speak for themselves. That comeback proved lasting. She went on to host popular talk shows well into the 1980s, cementing a legacy that outlasted the personal turbulence of the early 1960s. Red Skelton. Behind Red Skelton's beloved, goofy, comedic persona lay a private life marked by real tragedy. Most devastatingly, the loss of his young son Richard, who died of leukemia in 1958 at just 10 years old. That grief settled over the Skelton household for years and eventually overlapped with the slow unraveling of his marriage to Georgia Davis, his wife since 1945, and the mother of both his children. The couple's marriage limped along for over a decade after Richard's death before finally giving way. Georgia filed for divorce in November 1971, the same year Skelton's long-running variety show came to an end, though the divorce itself wasn't finalized until 1973. Biographers who have studied the coverage note that the relatively muted press attention surrounding the split seems to reflect genuine sympathy from entertainment reporters who had watched the family endure Richard's illness and death rather than any deliberate effort by Skelton or his representatives to suppress the story. Throughout the years leading up to the divorce, Skelton kept performing week after week, building his career around slapstick pantomime and beloved characters like Clem Kadiddlehopper, rarely, if ever, letting his personal grief show through on camera. Audiences who tuned in for laughter had little sense of the sorrow he carried off stage. The years that followed brought further heartbreak. Georgia struggled with her own health and emotional difficulties after the divorce, and in 1976, she took her own life on the 18th anniversary of Richard's death, a devastating coda to a family already marked by loss. Skelton went on to marry a third time to Lothian Toland, a marriage that lasted for the rest of his life. Vivian Vance. Vivian Vance became a household name, playing the loyal, wisecracking neighbor Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy, a role that arrived only after she had already weathered 2 divorces earlier in her career, first from Joseph Danek in 1931, then from musician George Koch in 1940. It was her third marriage to actor Philip Ober that overlapped most directly with her television fame. The two wed in 1941 and stayed together for 18 years, even as Ober took a recurring role on I Love Lucy alongside her. That marriage, reportedly marked by jealousy and by some accounts mistreatment, ended in a 1959 divorce that drew only modest press coverage, overshadowed by the far greater media appetite for stories about Vance's famous co-stars. 2 years later, in 1961, Vance remarried, this time to literary agent and publisher John Dodds. Unlike her earlier unions, this marriage brought her real stability, and the couple settled into a home in Stamford, Connecticut. It lasted for the rest of her life, ending only with her death in 1979. Vance reportedly carried a private awareness of the gap between her turbulent romantic history and the wholesome, dependable image audiences associated with Ethel Mertz. Friends and biographers have suggested she struggled for years with anxieties rooted in her difficult relationship with her own father, which she believed shaped her complicated pattern with men. Even so, by the time she found lasting happiness with Dodds, Vance had spent decades building one of television's most beloved comic partnerships, a professional legacy that in the end proved far steadier than her personal one. William Frawley. William Frawley, forever remembered as the gruff but lovable Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, had actually gone through a very different chapter of married life decades before television made him famous. He wed fellow vaudeville performer Edna Louise Brute in 1914, and the two built a joint stage act called Frawley and Louise, touring theaters together for years. The marriage soured, though, and the couple separated in 1921. Their divorce wasn't finalized until 1927, capping a tumultuous 13-year union that by most accounts involved plenty of friction on both sides. By the time Frawley landed the role of Fred Mertz in 1951, that early chapter of his life had faded almost entirely from public awareness. He was in his 60s, a veteran of more than 100 films, and audiences knew him only as the crusty, endearing landlord bickering affectionately with his television wife, Ethel. Frawley never remarried, and Edna herself moved on with her own life, marrying again and settling far from the spotlight her ex-husband would eventually enjoy. Frawley's real-life reputation wasn't spotless, however. His well-documented struggles with alcohol worried studio executives, and his co-star Daisy Arnaz enough that Frawley reportedly had to agree to certain behavioral conditions to keep the role essentially promising to stay sober and reliable on set, Whether or not that pressure had anything to do with keeping his old divorce out of the papers is hard to say for certain, but the two facts, his drinking troubles and his long-buried first marriage, sat quietly in the background of a performance audiences came to love for its warmth and humor. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you in the next one.